There is a book that tells the story of Genesis a second time. It begins where you would expect, with the making of heaven and earth, and it ends at the mountain where it began, with the people set free and the whole long count of the years complete. But between those two shores, it lingers over things the older telling left in shadow. It names the wives of the fathers. It gives the years their exact weight. It speaks of angels who taught the first man, and of a calendar written into the turning of the sun. For a very long time, this book was thought to be lost. Its full text survived in only one place on earth, carried east and kept and copied by faithful hands in the mountains of Ethiopia in an old and patient language, long after most of the world had forgotten it. It was never gathered into the pages of most Bibles, and yet it was never truly gone. It waited quietly the way a lamp waits in a closed room until it was found again and carefully read. Its old name is the Little Genesis. We know it now as the Book of Jubilees. Tonight you will hear its whole story, gently and slowly, from the first evening of the world to the last road that leads back to a mountain in the wilderness. There is nothing here to solve and nothing to fear. You do not need to remember any of it. You only need to let it carry you. So close your eyes now and let the world grow quiet around you. Let your shoulders soften and your breathing slow, and let the day set itself down, like a traveler laying down a heavy pack at the end of a long road. You are safe here. Rest and simply listen. Long ago, before this story was ever written down, it was first spoken on the top of a mountain. The mountain was called Sinai, and it stood alone in a wide and silent wilderness, far from any city, far from any field, in a country of stone and slow wind. And to that mountain came a man named Moses, walking up through the dry and rising land while the people he led waited below in their tents. He climbed until the world grew small beneath him, until the plain became a soft brown haze, and then he climbed a little higher still, until a great cloud came down and covered the summit like a folded wing. Into that cloud Moses went, and there he stayed for 40 days and 40 nights. The people below could not see him and could not follow. They only saw the cloud resting upon the height, and the glory of it, which was like a fire that did not burn, quiet at the edge of the sky. Day after day it stayed, and night after night, unmoving, as though the mountain itself were holding its breath. And the people waited and watched and wondered what was being said up there, in the bright and hidden place above them. And it was very still within the cloud. There was no wind there, and no cold, and no sound of the world below, no bleating of the flocks, no voices from the tents, no stir of the long day. There was only the soft and even light, warm as the light behind closed eyes, and the presence of the one who had called Moses up. It was a place set apart from all hurry, a place where 40 days could pass like a single quiet evening, and where a man might rest even as he listened, and lose all sense of the weariness he had carried up the mountain. And within the cloud, a voice spoke to Moses. It was the voice that had made the sea and the morning, gentle now and unhurried, telling him to bring up tablets of stone and to write. For the years of the world were to be counted and remembered, all their days and all their weeks, and all their long slow turning into what were called the Jubilees, the great circles of years that measured the age of everything. From the first day of the making of the world, to the day when a holy place would at last be built in the land, it was all to be set down, so that it would not be forgotten. Then the voice called for a helper, and out of the brightness came one of the highest of the messengers of heaven. He was named in the old book the Angel of the Presence, one of those who stand nearest to the throne, in the still light where nothing is ever afraid. He came softly, and he bowed, and he was given a single patient task. He was to take a book, and to open it before Moses, and to tell him the whole story of the world from its very beginning, exactly as it was written in the tablets of heaven. And so the angel of the presence began to speak. This is worth resting on for a moment before the story itself begins. For in the older telling, the one most people know, the account of creation seems to rise up out of the silence on its own, with no one holding the pen. But here, in the little Genesis, there is a hand behind the words and a face. There is an angel, seated as if beside a lamp, turning the pages of a heavenly book, reading them aloud to a tired man on a mountain, so that the man might write them down for all the generations who would come after. The whole story in this telling is something remembered and handed down with care, a story that was always meant to be spoken gently, from one keeper to the next. And that is perhaps the truest thing to keep in mind as the telling begins. This is not a story shouted from a rooftop, nor argued in a marketplace. It is a story dictated softly in a quiet place by one who loves it to one who will keep it. It is the kind of story that is meant to be received in stillness, passed on in a low and even voice in the hush of the evening from one keeper of the tale to the next, each one simply the latest to whom it is told, needing to do nothing but listen and let it be told, as it was once told upon the mountain. As the angel began at the beginning of all beginnings, before there were days to count them by. He told how in the first age of ages, before the earth had a shape or the waters had a shore, the Lord of all things set his mind toward making a world. And he did not make it in silence, and he did not make it alone. On the very first day, before the light of any morning, he made the heavens that are above, and the earth beneath them, and the deep waters, and the darkness that lay over them like a soft, unbroken sleep. And on that same first day, before he made the sun or the stars, he made the angels. He made them in their great companies, each after its kind. There were the angels of the presence, who stand always before him. There were the angels of holiness, who keep the things that are set apart. And there were the angels who tend to the works of the world itself, the angels of the winds that move across the sea, and the angels of the clouds, and of the mist, and of the frost, and of the hail and the snow. There were angels for the sound of the thunder, and for the flash of the lightning, and for the turning of the cold and the heat, and for the winter and the spring, and for every quiet season that would ever pass over the earth. All of them he made on that first day, so that when the world woke into being, it would not wake alone, but among watchers who loved it. And when the angels first saw the works of the Lord, and understood a little of what was being made, they lifted up their voices and they praised him. Their song went out over the dark and formless deep like the first sound the world ever heard, warm and steady, before there was even a sky to hold it. It is a thing worth dwelling on, the vast and gentle chorus of the first morning, rising up out of the dark, sung by countless bright and loving voices. Before there was a single star to hear it, before there was a single shore for it to fall upon. It was not a loud song, but a deep one, full of wonder, the sound of creatures who had just been made looking upon the beginning of everything and finding it good. And so the world was never, from its first breath, a lonely place. Before the light there were watchers. Before the sky there was song. The angels of the winds and of the clouds and of the seasons all stood ready at their tasks, waiting to tend the world the moment it should wake. The angel of the dew ready to lay its gentle wetness on the grass that did not yet exist. The angel of the frost, ready to trace its patterns on windows not yet made. The angel of the spring, ready to call up flowers in a world still dark and formless. All of heaven leaned toward the earth in tenderness, waiting for it to begin. And the angel told Moses of how the years of the world would be counted, not in ones and twos, but in great and beautiful circles. 7 days made a week, and 7 years made a week of years, and 7 weeks of years made a jubilee, a span of 49 years, at the end of which came a year of release and rest, when debts were forgiven, and the land itself rested, and everything returned to its right place. And by these jubilees the whole history of the world was to be measured, from the first day of creation onward, circle after circle, each one turning gently into the next. It is from this that the book takes its name, the Book of Jubilees, for it counts the ages of the world not in bare numbers, but in these great and restful rounds, so that even the reckoning of time is made to breathe, and to rest, and to begin again. The angel of the presence told all of this to Moses on the mountain, and Moses wrote it down, letter by letter, in the long quiet of the cloud. The days passed over them, though within the brightness they hardly seemed like days at all. And the story went on, as gently as it had begun, moving from the making of the angels toward the making of the light, and the water, and the green and growing earth. You do not need to hold on to any of it. Let the mountain be far away, and the cloud be soft, and the voice of the angel be low and even, like someone reading to you across a warm and darkened room. For now, the world is only just beginning. The light has not yet been divided from the dark, and there is all the time in the world, and more, to tell what comes next. And as you rest a little deeper, let the story move on into the first of the 7 days. On the first day, then, as the angel told it, the heavens and the earth were made, and the waters, and all the hosts of the angels, and the darkness that rested over the deep. And when the first day was drawing toward its close, the Lord spoke over the waters, and there was light. And the light was good and gentle, and it spread out soft and new across a world that had never seen it. It was not a harsh light, nor a sudden one, but a slow and kindly brightening, like the first gray glow that comes to a window long before the sun, when the room is still dim and the day has not yet begun in earnest. It touched the face of the waters, and the deep received it. And for the first time there was something to see, though as yet there was no one but the angels to see it. Then he set a boundary between the light and the darkness, and he called the light day, and the darkness he called night. So the evening came, and then the morning, and the first day was finished, and the whole of creation rested in it, quiet and pleased. And there is a gentle order in it, first the evening and then the morning. The day did not begin with a great blaze of noon, but with the soft settling of dusk, and then the slow coming of light. In this old reckoning, each day begins in the quiet of the evening and moves toward the morning. The day begins, one might say, with rest, and only afterward with waking. On the second day the angel said, "The Lord made the firmament, the great, wide arch of the sky that we look up into. He set it in the midst of the waters, so that half of the waters went up above it, and half remained below it. And on that day alone of all the days of making, he divided the waters, so that some became the deep seas beneath, and some became the far, high oceans of the sky, from which the rain would one day fall. And when the second day was ended, the sky stood over the world like a curtain drawn in a still room, and it was good." On the third day the Lord gathered the lower waters into one place, and the dry land appeared. The seas drew back and lay down in their beds, and the rivers found their winding ways, and the springs opened in the hills, and the dew settled over the valleys. And then out of the fresh earth he called forth the green and growing things, the grass and the herb-yielding seed, and every tree, each carrying its own fruit and its own quiet promise of more. On that same third day, the angel told Moses, "The Lord planted the Garden of Eden in a good and eastern land, and he made it more beautiful and more fragrant than any place upon the earth. And when the third day was ended, the whole world was clothed in green, and it was good." On the fourth day the Lord made the great lights of heaven. He made the sun, and he made the moon, and he set the stars in their places, each with its own small and steady flame. And here the angel paused over something the older telling passes by quickly. For the sun, he said, was made to be a great sign upon the earth, a sign for the days, and for the Sabbaths, and for the months, and for the feasts, and for the years, and for all the circling seasons of the world, by the sun, and its faithful rising and setting, the whole calendar of heaven would be kept. It would divide the day from the night, and it would number the years without ever losing count, so that the appointed times would always fall where they were meant to fall, and never wander. This is one of the quiet treasures of the little Genesis. In it, the measure of time is not a small thing, nor an afterthought. It is written into the very light of the fourth day. The sun is not only made to warm the world and to light it, but to keep it in order, to hold the feasts in their seasons, and the Sabbaths in their weeks, and the years in their long and even rows, so that no day would ever be lost, and no holy time would ever slip out of its place. all of this, the angel said, was appointed and written in the tablets of heaven on the fourth day of the world. And when that day was ended, the sun sank down for the first time behind the edge of the earth, and the stars came out over the new seas, and it was good. On the fifth day, the Lord filled the waters with life. He made the great creatures that move in the deep, the vast and gentle swimmers that glide through the cold and quiet places far below, and the small ones without number that flicker in the shallows and the streams, silver and quick in the sunlit water. And he made every winged bird, from the eagle that rides the high wind to the small brown bird that sings in the low branches at dusk. He made the birds that wade in the reeds, and the birds that skim the sea, and the birds that call to one another across the still evening air. The waters swarmed, and the air was filled with wings, and every living thing after its kind moved through the world for the first time. And there was, for the first time, the sound of living things, the splash of a fish, the beat of a wing, a single bird's call carried over the new waters. And when the fifth day was ended, the sea was awake, and the sky was awake, and it was good. On the sixth day, the Lord made the living creatures of the dry land, the cattle, and the wild beasts of the field, and every small thing that creeps upon the ground. And when all of these were made and standing in the young world, the Lord made humankind. He made them, the angel said, male and female he made them, and he gave them care over the fish of the sea, and the birds of the air, and the cattle, and the whole of the earth, and all that moved upon it. And when the sixth day was ended, the world was full of green, and full of creatures, and full of voices, and it was very good. The angel of the presence told all of this to Moses on the mountain, day by day, in order, and Moses wrote it down. And when the angel came to the seventh day, he slowed, and his voice grew softer still. For on the seventh day the Lord made nothing new. He looked upon all that he had made, and he saw that it was finished and whole and good. And he rested. And he blessed that day above all the others, and set it apart, and made it holy. It was a day for stillness and for peace, a day when the work would lay down its tools, and the world would simply be and be glad. And the angel told Moses something more, which is dear to this book above all others. The Lord chose out the seventh day to be kept forever by his own people, a sign between him and them through all their generations. The very highest of the angels, those of the presence and those of holiness, were made to keep it with him from the first, resting when he rested, so that the peace of that day would never be broken in heaven. And it was to be kept on earth in the same way, a day of rest given as a gift, and not as a burden, a still pool set in the running of the week, where the whole world might stop and breathe. And there is one more small treasure the angel set down here, which the older telling does not mention. He told Moses that there were 22 kinds of work done in the making of the world, across the 6 days, 22 separate labors of creation, from the light of the first day to the making of humankind on the 6th. And these, he said, answered to 22 generations of faithful ones, from the first man down through the fathers to Jacob, whose story this book would tell. So the making of the world and the line of the fathers were quietly woven together, matched one to another, as though the whole history of the people were folded into the very pattern of creation itself. It is the kind of hidden harmony the little Genesis delights in, the sense that everything is ordered and counted and set in its place, and that nothing is left to chance. So the 7 days were finished, and the world was made and blessed and set turning. And the first Sabbath came down upon it like a hand laid gently over a sleeping child. There is a great quietness in that thought, that at the very heart of the making of all things, there is a day set aside for rest. That rest is not the absence of the work, but its crown. That the world was not called good only when it was busy, but most of all when it grew still. Let that quietness settle over you now, the work of a whole world laid down, and a day at the end of it that asks nothing and only rests. And as the world settles into its first evening, the story turns softly toward a garden. When the world was made and the first Sabbath had passed over it, the angel told Moses of what came next. And here, again, the little Genesis tells the old story with a few of its own quiet details, like a familiar path seen in a softer light. In the first week the man was made, and in the second week the Lord brought before him every creature of the land, and every bird of the air, one after another, each in its turn. And the man looked upon them, and he gave to each of them a name. He named the cattle, and the wild beasts, and the small things that creep, and the birds that fly, and the fish of the waters, each after its kind. It was a gentle and unhurried work. The naming of the animals, the man standing in the young green world, and the creatures coming to him without fear, and the sound of the first words being spoken over them, so that ever after they would be known. It must have been a deeply peaceful thing. There was no hurry in it and no fear. The creatures came to the man not as they come now, wary and quick to flee, but trustingly, one after another, in the soft morning of the world. The great beasts came, and the small ones, and the birds settled near, and each waited quietly to be named. And the man looked at each of them, and understood something of what it was, and gave it a word that fit it. That belonged to it, and then it went on its way, and the next came. All morning, perhaps, and into the long golden afternoon, the naming went on, gentle and slow, until every living thing upon the earth had a name of its own, and the world was a little more known and a little more loved than it had been before. But when all the creatures had passed before him, and each had received its name, the man saw that they came 2 by 2, each with its own companion, and he alone had none. And the Lord saw it too. So he caused a deep sleep to fall upon the man, and while he slept, the Lord took a part of him, and from it he formed a woman. And when the man awoke and saw her, he knew her at once as bone of his bone, and he was no longer alone. And here the angel gave her the name that is written in the heavenly tablets. She was called Eve, the mother of all who would live. Now the angel told Moses something the older telling does not say. The man was not brought into the garden at once, but only after a time, after 40 days, when the days of his making were fulfilled. and the woman was brought in later still, after 80 days. This the book explains as a kind of quiet pattern written into the world from the beginning, a rhythm of days and of waiting, of things kept apart until their proper time and then brought gently in. And so, each in their season, the man and the woman came at last into the Garden of Eden, into the most beautiful and fragrant place that had ever been, and they were given it to keep and to tend. And there is another tender detail that the little Genesis holds, which many people have never heard. It tells that in the garden, the man and the woman were not left untaught. The angels themselves came near to them. They showed the man how to work the ground and how to care for the growing things and how to keep the garden well. They taught him what he needed to know, patiently, the way a gardener teaches a child which plants to water and which to leave. So the first days of the world were not lonely, nor bewildering. There were teachers in the garden, bright and kind, walking among the trees in the cool part of the day. It is a lovely thing, the first man learning his work not by hard trial and not by painful mistake, but by gentle instruction from patient and shining teachers. This is how the vine is tended, they might have shown him. This is how the soil is turned. This is the season for planting, and this the season for rest. And the man learned, and the woman with him, and the garden flourished under their care. It was a kind of childhood for the whole human race, a time of learning in a safe and beautiful place, with wise ones near at hand to teach and to guard. In the little Genesis, the world does not begin in confusion, but in careful, loving instruction, given freely by those who wished the first people well. For 7 years the man and the woman dwelt there, tending the garden and living in its peace, and all was well. But there was, as the old story remembers, one tree they were told not to eat from. And there was in that garden a creature more subtle than the others, the serpent. And in the 8th year, on a certain day in the 2nd month, the serpent came to the woman and spoke to her and asked her why she did not eat from that one tree. And he told her that she would not die, but that her eyes would be opened. And the woman looked at the fruit, and it seemed good to her and pleasant. And she took some of it and ate. And she gave some to the man who was with her, and he ate as well. And their eyes were opened, just as the serpent had said, but not to gladness. They saw for the first time that they were uncovered, and they felt ashamed. And so they took the broad leaves of the fig tree, and they sewed them together, and made coverings for themselves, and hid among the trees. It is told gently, without any thunder, only 2 people, who had done the one thing they were asked not to do, hiding in the green shade and waiting. And when the Lord walked in the garden in the cool of the day, he called to them. And they came out from among the trees and told him what they had done. And he spoke to the serpent, and to the woman, and to the man, and set upon each a share of sorrow, the serpent to go low upon the ground, the woman to know pain in bringing forth her children, and the man to labor for his bread among thorns and thistles all the days of his life, until he returned at last to the earth from which he was taken. It is told quietly and without any harshness. The sorrows that were spoken were not cruelties, but the plain truth of the world that now lay ahead, a world in which bread would be won by labor, and children born through pain, and the ground would not always give its fruit easily. And yet, even here, the Lord did not turn away from the man and the woman in anger, nor cast them off as strangers. He still spoke to them. He still cared for them. He still, in the very next breath, made ready to provide for them. The love that had made them did not fail, even now. It only followed them, changed and quieter, out through the gate of the garden and into the wide world beyond. But even here, in the telling of the sorrow, the little Genesis keeps its gentleness. For before the man and the woman went out from the garden, the Lord did not leave them cold or bare. He made for them clothing of skins, warm and lasting, to cover them and keep them, and he clothed them with his own hand. And then they went out into the wide world, to a land where they would live and work and raise their children. And the book tells one last quiet thing about that leaving. As the man went out from the garden, on the morning of his going, he did not go in anger or in silence. He paused, and he made an offering of sweet things, of frankincense and of fragrant spices, of galbanum and of stacte and of sweet-smelling myrrh, burning them in the fresh air of the morning, so that a soft and fragrant smoke rose up over the edge of Eden as he left it. It is a strange and beautiful picture. The first man, leaving the most beautiful place in the world, turning back for a moment to lift up something sweet, a small and grateful thing carried on the morning air. So they came out of the garden, and the gate was closed behind them, and they made their home in the land beyond it. And though they had lost the garden, they had not lost everything. They still had the days, and the seasons, and one another, and the memory of the trees, and the angels who had taught them did not forget them. There is an old comfort in this, that even a leaving can be made gentle, that even when a door closes, there can still be warm clothing, and a fragrant morning, and a road that leads somewhere new. Nothing here is left to end in fear. And as you rest, and the fragrant smoke drifts and fades over the edge of the garden, the story moves on to the children who were born to them, and to a man who would one day walk with the angels. Now in the land beyond the garden, the man and the woman made their home, and in time children were born to them. The angel told Moses of the sons and the daughters that came, and of the years that turned over them, slow and countable, each one written in its place. Their first sons were Cain and Abel, and as the older telling remembers, so this one tells it too, that each of the brothers brought an offering to the Lord, Abel from among his flocks, and Cain from the fruit of the ground. And the offering of Abel was received with favor, and the offering of Cain was not. And Cain grew angry, and his face fell. And out in the field, away from the eyes of others, he rose up against his brother, and struck him, and Abel died. The little Genesis tells this sorrow plainly, and then, as it often does, it draws from it a quiet and lasting word, that from that day it was set down in the tablets of heaven that whoever strikes down another in secret and by treachery must answer for it, and that the earth itself remembers such a thing. It is spoken not as a threat, but as a kind of law woven into the world, that no cruelty is ever truly hidden, and no gentleness ever truly lost. And there was great grief in the house of the first man and woman, for they had lost both their sons in a single day, one to death and one to wandering. And they mourned for a long season, through many turning years. The sorrow was real, as sorrow is, and yet it did not harden into despair. For the first man and woman had many other children besides, sons and daughters, born through the long years, whose names the old book keeps, and their house was not left empty. Life went on around them, even in their grief, as it always does. But grief does not have the last word in this book. For in time another son was born to them, and they called him Seth, and in him they found comfort and a new beginning. And through Seth the line of the faithful went on. It is a gentle thing to remember that after the deepest loss a new child came and was named and was loved and carried the hope of the family forward. The story did not end at the grave of Abel. It went on through Seth into the long generations that followed, and the light was not put out. To Seth was born a son named Enos, and in the days of Enos, men first began to call upon the name of the Lord, to lift up prayer, and to remember him aloud. And to Enos was born Kenan, and to Kenan Mahalalel, and to Mahalalel Jared. The angel named them for Moses one by one, and named their wives as well, for this is one of the small, warm habits of the little Genesis, that it does not let the mothers of the generations go unnamed. Where the older telling gives only the fathers, this book gives the wives beside them, so that the long line of the years is not a row of solitary men, but a line of households, of husbands and wives together, each raising up the next. It is a peaceful thing simply to hear the names go by, Seth and Enos and Kenan and Mahalalel and Jared, each a life lived out in full, each a father and a mother raising up the next, each passing on what they had received. Of most of them little is remembered, only that they lived and had their children and kept the faith, and in their time lay down and were gathered to their people. And there is a deep comfort in that plainness. Not every life needs a great story told about it. Most of the good that has ever been done in the world was done quietly, by people whose names are barely remembered, mothers and fathers keeping the light, handing it on, and then resting. The long line of the faithful is made mostly of such quiet ones, and it is no less precious for that. And to Jared was born a son named Enoch, and here the angel slowed, for Enoch was unlike any who had come before him. Enoch, the book says, was the first among all the children of earth who learned to write. He learned writing and knowledge and wisdom, and he set them down in a book. And more than this, he watched the heavens. He watched the sun in its rising and its setting, and the moon in its changing, and the ordering of the months, and the pattern of the weeks, and the long circling of the years. And he wrote it all down, carefully, according to their order, so that the children of men who came after him might know the reckoning of the seasons, and never lose the count of time. In him, the calendar that was written into the sun on the fourth day was first written down by a human hand. And Enoch was given more than knowledge. The angels of God took him, and showed him things, visions of what was and what would be. They showed him the days that had passed since the beginning, and the days that were still to come, all the way to the day of judgment far ahead. And Enoch saw it all, and understood, and wrote it down as a testimony, so that it would be kept. And then comes the gentlest thing of all about him. Enoch did not die as other men die. He was taken. He was brought into the Garden of Eden, into that same beautiful place from which the first man had gone out, and there he remained, in honor and in peace. And there, the book says, he writes down the deeds of men, and keeps the record of the world, and burns the sweet incense of the sanctuary, which is acceptable before the Lord. He walked with the angels, and he was taken to walk with them still, in the fragrant quiet of the garden, beyond the reach of sorrow. The little Genesis holds Enoch very dear and returns to him more than once, for he is a kind of keeper, the first of the keepers of the story, the one who wrote down the signs of heaven and the count of the years so that they would not be lost. And it is fitting that such a one should be brought into the garden and not into the grave. For a man who spent his life remembering and writing down and keeping the record faithful was given at the last a place where the record could be kept forever, in the sweet and unbroken peace of Eden. Long after his own children had grown old and died, Enoch remained, they say, at his gentle work, turning the pages of the great record, offering the fragrant incense, watching over the ages as they passed. He is one of the quiet guardians of this whole book, and it is good to know he is there. And there is a quiet wonder in that, a man carried away from the weariness of the world, not into darkness, but into a garden, not lost, but kept, not ended, but simply moved into a deeper and safer peace, where the incense rises, and the record is gentle, and nothing is ever again afraid. After Enoch came his son Methuselah, who lived longer than any man of his age. And after Methuselah came Lamech, and to Lamech was born a son who would matter greatly to the whole story of the world. When the child was born, Lamech looked upon him and named him Noah, and said that this one would bring them comfort and rest from the labor of their hands and from the hard ground that had been cursed. And so the boy Noah grew, in a world that was growing older and darker, and more troubled, a boy in whom a great deal of hope was quietly placed. The angel told all of this to Moses in order, generation by generation, name by name, and the years were counted and written down. And the long line ran on from Adam through Seth, through Enos and Kenan and Mahalalel and Jared, through Enoch who was taken, and Methuselah and Lamech down to Noah, a thread of faithfulness drawn through many hundreds of years, unbroken, passing from parent to child, from one keeper of the story to the next. It is a peaceful thing to hear the generations named, the sound of them going by, one after another, like waves coming in slow and even upon a shore. Each one lived and loved and raised the next and laid down their days when the time came and passed the world along. And still the thread held, and still the story went on. And even as the good line ran on through Noah, the wider world was being cared for in its own way. For in those early days, the book tells, certain watchers of heaven were sent down to the earth, sent to teach the children of men, and to show them what was right, and to help them do justice upon the earth. They came as teachers in the beginning on a gentle errand, to walk among the young peoples of the world and to guide them. And as the quiet gathers around you, the story turns toward those watchers and toward the days of Noah. The angel told Moses of the watchers, and this is one of the parts of the little Genesis that people remember longest, for it opens a door that the older telling leaves only barely ajar. As among the angels, the book says, there were some who were sent down to the earth in the early days, sent to watch over it, and to teach the children of men what was right, and to help them walk in good ways. They were called the Watchers, because that was their task, to watch and to guard and to guide. And for a while they did as they were sent to do. But the world below was full of the sons and daughters of men, and the daughters were fair to look upon. And the watchers, who had come down to guide, began instead to desire. They looked upon the daughters of men, and they chose wives for themselves from among them, and came down to live among mortals, and forgot the high and quiet place from which they had come. And children were born of these unions, children who were not like other children, but great in size and strength, of a race of giants who walked heavily upon the young earth. And from that turning, trouble spread across the world like water across a floor. For the giants were violent, and the ways of men grew crooked, and cruelty and wrongdoing multiplied until all flesh had corrupted its path upon the earth. The watchers who had come to teach goodness had instead taught harm, and the world they had been sent to guard grew heavy with sorrow. This is not told with any relish, and neither will we linger in it. It is told as a grief that something meant to help had gone wrong, and that the earth was suffering for it. And the Lord looked upon the earth and saw that it was troubled, and that the peace of the making had been broken, and he was moved with sorrow over it. Now here is a mercy that the little Genesis is careful to keep. The Lord did not act in haste, and he did not act without judgment. He set right what had gone wrong among the watchers. Those who had fallen were bound and taken down into the deep places of the earth and shut away, so that they could do no more harm. And the great and violent offspring were not permitted to fill the world forever. In time, the Lord shortened the years that any person would live, so that the long, long lifetimes of the early world would slowly grow smaller, and the age of the giants would pass away. But the corruption among the children of men had spread very far, and the Lord resolved to wash the earth clean and to begin again. And so he determined to bring a great rain upon the world, a flood, to cover over what had gone wrong, and to give the earth a new and quiet start. Yet even in this, the book keeps its tenderness, for the Lord did not look upon a world with no goodness left in it. There was one man in whom the old faithfulness still lived. His name was Noah, and Noah was righteous in his ways, and he walked with God, and he had not turned aside with the rest. And the Lord looked upon Noah with favor, and would not let him be swept away with the trouble of his time. And this is worth resting upon, for it is the heart of the whole matter. Even in the darkest hour the world had yet known, there was one household where goodness still burned, one man who still walked in the old ways, one family in which the light was kept. The whole earth had turned aside, but not everyone, and that was enough. The Lord did not need a multitude of the faithful to begin again. He needed only one household that had kept the way, one small and quiet flame that had not gone out. And he found it in Noah, and around that single faithful family, he would build the whole new world. It is a comforting thought that even when so much has gone wrong, the keeping of goodness in one small place can be enough to save everything. So the Lord spoke to Noah and told him what was coming and told him what to do. And Noah did all that he was commanded, not in a day, but over long and patient years. For the building of the ark was a great work, and it was not finished quickly. Noah gathered the wood and shaped it and joined it and sealed it against the water within and without, and made the rooms within it, and the door and the window. And all the while the world around him went on as it always had, heedless, while one faithful man labored steadily at a vast and strange vessel upon the dry land, trusting a warning that had not yet come to pass. It was a long obedience, quiet and unglamorous, day after day, year after year, and it was exactly this patient faithfulness that would, in the end, save every living thing. And when it was finished, it was a vast wooden vessel, sealed within and without, with room for his family and for the creatures of the earth. And into it, in the appointed time, came Noah and his wife, whose name the little Genesis remembers as Emzara, and his 3 sons and their wives. And with them came the animals 2 by 2 and 7 by 7 of every kind that lived, gathered in from the fields and the forests and the far places, brought safely aboard. And then the doors of heaven and the fountains of the deep were opened, and the great rain came down. It fell, and it did not stop day after day, until the waters rose over the low ground, and then over the hills, and then over the high places, until the whole troubled earth lay quiet beneath a wide and level sea. And upon that sea floated one small ark, dark against the gray water, carrying within it every living thing that would be spared. Within that ark, through the long days of the rain, there was a deep and sheltered quiet, the soft sound of the water against the wood, the warm dark, the breathing of the sleeping animals, and the little household of Noah, safe and gathered, riding out the storm together. Whatever was happening in the wide world outside, inside the ark there was shelter, and there was company, and there was rest. It was a kept and quiet place in the middle of a great flood, a floating peace that the waters could not reach. There were the long, dim rows of stalls, and the creatures settled in them, 2 by 2, drowsing through the days, the great beasts breathing slow and deep, the small ones curled in the straw, the birds folded and still upon their perches. There was the gentle rocking of the vessel upon the swell, back and forth, like a cradle upon the water. And there was Noah, moving quietly among them all in the lamplight, seeing that each was fed and each was safe. And each was at rest, and then lying down himself at the end of the day to sleep, while the rain fell softly on the roof above, and the ark rode on through the dark, carrying its precious cargo safely through the night. There are few pictures in all the old stories as peaceful as that one. Every living thing gathered in and kept and rocked gently to sleep while the storm passed harmlessly overhead. And the rain did not last forever. In its time it slowed, and then it ceased, and the waters began to sink back slowly down from the high places, back toward the seas and the deep from which they had risen. And the ark, which had drifted for so long, came at last to rest upon a mountain and stood still. And Noah waited and watched, and after a time he opened a window and let out a bird to see whether the world was ready to receive them again. So the great rain ended, as all rains do, and the flood that had covered the earth began to draw back and let the dry land breathe. And within the ark, the long waiting turned quietly toward a morning when the doors would open, and the creatures would go out 2 by 2 onto a washed and shining world, and everything would begin again. There is a deep rest in that thought, that even the greatest flood recedes, and even the longest rain has a last drop, and even a world that has been through so much can be given a fresh and quiet morning. Nothing here ends underwater. The waters go back, the mountain holds, and the ark comes safely to rest. And as the flood draws back, and the ark settles upon the mountain, the story turns toward the new world, and toward the promise that would be given to Noah beneath a bow of light in the clouds. When the waters had drawn back and the mountaintops stood dry again beneath the sun, Noah opened the great door of the ark, and he and his household came out onto the washed and shining earth. And the animals came out after them, 2 by 2 and 7 by 7, stepping down onto the wet ground and scattering out into the new world, into the fields and the forests that would once more be their home. And the first thing Noah did upon that clean and quiet earth was to give thanks. He built an altar and made an offering upon it, and lifted up his gratitude to the Lord who had carried him safely through the flood. And the little Genesis lingers over this offering and describes it with care, the sweet things burned upon the altar, the fragrant smoke rising up into the clear air over a world that had just been made new. It was the same kind of grateful, fragrant offering that the first man had made when he left the garden long ago. And now, at the beginning of the new world, it rose again, a soft thread of sweetness lifting into the morning. And here the little Genesis remembers something the older telling does not dwell upon, that the Lord gave to Noah certain gentle commands for the keeping of the new world, that life was to be honored, and blood not to be eaten, and that the earth was to be treated with reverence, so that the wrongs of the world before the flood would not take root again. These were not heavy burdens, but wise and kindly boundaries given to keep the new world well. The way a good gardener sets a fence about the tender young plants. And Noah received them gladly, and kept them, and taught them to his children. And the Lord received his offering, and was pleased, and he made a promise to Noah, a covenant, an agreement that would hold for all the generations to come. He promised that never again would the whole earth be covered over by such a flood. Never again would the waters rise to wash away the world. The seasons would keep their turning, seed time and harvest, cold and heat, summer and winter, day and night, and they would not cease, but would go on faithfully as long as the earth endured. And to seal the promise, the Lord set a sign in the sky. He placed a bow in the clouds, a curve of soft and shining color, arching over the earth after the rain. And he said that whenever the clouds gathered and the rain fell, the bow would appear in them, and it would be a reminder, a gentle token, hung in the sky that the promise still held, and that the waters would never again overwhelm the world. It is one of the kindest images in all the old stories, that the very clouds that once poured out the flood now carry within them a bow of light, a sign that the danger has passed, that the covenant remains, that the rain will always, always stop. And so ever after, in every land and in every age, when the rain has fallen and begins to clear, and the sun breaks through, and the great arch of color rises up over the wet and shining world, there is the old promise made new again. The children who see it and point at it and marvel at its colors are looking at the very sign that was given to Noah on the morning the world began again. The bow does not need to be understood to be beautiful. It only needs to be there, curving quietly over the fields after the storm, saying without words that the worst is past, and the earth is safe, and the rain has stopped, and the light has come back. Now the little Genesis tells more of Noah than the older account does, and much of it has to do with the ordering of the years, for this is the book's great love. The angel told Moses that Noah kept a feast in the New World, a feast in the third month, which was called the Feast of Weeks. It was to be kept as a remembrance of the covenant, year after year, a glad and grateful gathering set at its appointed time. And Noah kept it, and his children after him, so that the promise would never be forgotten, but would be renewed in season, as regular and faithful as the turning of the months themselves. And here the book returns, as it loves to do, to the reckoning of time, to the calendar. For the angel told Moses of the ordering of the year, and of how the days were meant to be counted. The year, he said, was to be reckoned by the sun, and it was to be 364 days, a number that divides itself neatly and evenly into weeks and into seasons, so that the feasts would always fall upon the same days and never wander from their places. 4 seasons, of 13 weeks each, 91 days apiece, turning one into the next in a steady and unbroken round. By this reckoning, the appointed times would be kept in perfect order, and no holy day would ever slip out of its season, and the whole calendar of the world would stand as firm, and even as the courses of the stars. This is one of the truest marks of the little Genesis, the thing that sets it most apart. It cares very deeply that time be kept well, that the days be counted, and the years be ordered, and the feasts be held in their seasons, so that the life of the world might move in a calm and faithful rhythm, like a heart that beats evenly, like a tide that comes and goes at its appointed hour. There is a great peace hidden in that care. It is the peace of knowing that the seasons will turn as they always have, that the winter will give way to the spring, that the feast will come round again next year as it did the last, that nothing is lost from the count and nothing forgotten. And the little Genesis tells that Noah planted a vineyard in the New World and tended it, and in its season it gave its fruit. And he kept a feast of thanksgiving with the wine of it, offering to the Lord and rejoicing with his household. And he blessed his sons and divided among them the good things of the earth, and spoke to them of the ways they should walk, and of the covenant, and of the ordering of the times. For Noah was, above all, the passeron of what he had received, a bridge between the world that was drowned and the world that was given anew. All that had been kept faithful from the beginning, the knowledge of the one God, the keeping of the feasts, the count of the days, the ways of righteousness, all of it came through the ark with Noah, and out again into the fresh new world, safe in his keeping. And Noah lived on for many long years in the new world beneath the bow. He saw his sons grow, and their children after them, and their children's children, until the earth began once more to fill with people and with voices. And he taught them what he knew, the keeping of the feasts, the ordering of the days, the ways of righteousness that he had carried through the flood. He was, in his time, a keeper of the old and faithful things, passing them along to the new world just as they had been passed to him. And when at last his own long life drew toward its close, he had the deep contentment of one who has kept faith through the greatest of trials, and has handed on, whole and unbroken, all that was given him to keep. There is something deeply restful in the figure of Noah in his later years, an old man beneath a promising sky, watching the seasons turn as he had been told they always would, surrounded by his grandchildren, keeping the feasts in their proper months, trusting the count of the days. He had come through the greatest storm the world had ever known, and now he lived in a long and quiet peace, in a world that had been given a second morning. And so the new world settled into its rhythm, the seasons turning, the feasts keeping their places, the bow appearing in the clouds whenever the rain came and then went. The count of the years went on, calm and unbroken, and the family of Noah grew and spread and began to look outward, toward the wide and empty earth that lay waiting to be filled. Let that steadiness settle over you now, the turning of the seasons, the keeping of the count, the sure and even rhythm of a world at peace. There is nothing here to hurry. The years will turn as they always have. The rain will stop, and the bow will appear, and the feast will come round again. And as the family of Noah grows, and the earth waits to be filled, the story turns toward the dividing of the whole world among his sons. As the years went on in the new world, the family of Noah grew large, and his 3 sons, Shem and Ham and Japheth, each had many children, and those children had children until there were peoples enough to fill more than one land. And Noah, being wise and wishing that there be peace among them, resolved that the whole earth should be divided fairly among his sons, so that each would have his own portion, and none would quarrel with another over the boundaries of the world. The little Genesis tells this dividing with unusual care, and with a mapmaker's patience, going over the earth from end to end. And it does so, as ever, gently and in order, so that the telling is almost like a hand moving slowly across a great map by lamplight, tracing the rivers and the coasts, and saying quietly, "This part shall be for this son, and that part for that one." So Noah divided the earth into 3 great portions, and gave one to each of his sons, and they cast lots to see which portion would fall to whom. And it was done with fairness and with prayer, so that none could say afterward that he had been cheated of his share, or that another had been favored above him. The lot fell as it fell, and each son received the portion that came to him. And Noah wrote it all down in a book, so that the boundaries would be remembered, and the dividing would stand for all the generations to come. It was not a hasty thing, but a careful one, the ordering of a whole world among the children who would inherit it. To Shem, the eldest, fell the middle of the earth, the wide lands of the center, running from the great rivers of the east toward the sea in the west. And the little Genesis says something beautiful about Shem's portion. It says that within it lay the very center of all the earth, the place that would be more holy than any other, the mountain that would one day be called Zion, set like the still heart of the whole world. And it says that in Shem's portion, too, was the Garden of Eden itself, kept apart and holy in the east. So the eldest son received the middle and the heart of things, the land where the holiest places lay, the quiet center around which all the rest of the earth was arranged. And to Ham fell the portion toward the south, the warm lands that stretched away to the hot and distant seas, the wide countries of the south and the southwest, with their great rivers and their far shores. And to Japheth fell the portion toward the north, the cold and spacious lands that reached away toward the far northern seas, broad and open, running out toward the edges of the world, where the winters were long. And when the great division was made among the 3 sons, they divided their portions again among their own children, so that each grandson of Noah received a share within his father's land, a country of his own, with its own hills and rivers and coasts. The angel named them for Moses, one after another, the peoples and their places, spreading out across the 3 great portions of the earth like seeds carried on a wide wind, each settling into the ground that had been given to it. There is a slow and soothing quality to this part of the telling, the way it moves patiently across the whole face of the earth, giving each land its place and each people its home. It reads almost like a map traced by a gentle hand in the evening. Here the great sea, and here the rivers that run into it. Here the mountains, and here the plains beyond them. This land for these children, and that land for those. Coast after coast, river after river, the world is filled in unhurriedly, until there is a place for everyone, and everyone has a place. And no corner of the earth is forgotten, and no people is left without a home. The whole world is accounted for, and arranged, and settled, like a great household being made ready before nightfall. And the book gives to Shem's portion, in the very center, a place of special honor and quietness. For there, it says, were 3 holy places, created to stand facing one another across the earth, the Garden of Eden, the Holy of Holies and the dwelling of the Lord, and Mount Sinai in the midst of the wilderness, and Mount Zion, the very center, the navel of the earth. These 3 the book names as the holy places of the world, set apart, more sacred than any other ground. And it is a beautiful thought that in the heart of all the wide and divided earth there should be a still and holy center, toward which everything else is arranged. A quiet middle place, like the calm at the center of a turning wheel, around which all the peoples and all their lands are gently ordered. And here the little Genesis tells a thing that matters to the whole story that follows. When the dividing was done, and each had received his portion, Noah made his sons and grandsons swear an oath, a solemn promise, that each would keep to the land that had fallen to him, and would not seize the portion of another, nor cross into it to take what was not his. For Noah knew that peace among the peoples depended on this, that each should be content with his own place, and honor the boundaries that had been set. And a curse was spoken over anyone who would break the oath, and cross over, and take by force the land that belonged to his brother. And the book remembers, sadly and quietly, that not everyone kept the oath. For one of the grandsons of Ham, whose name was Canaan, saw that the land which had fallen to Shem's line, the good land along the sea in the middle of the earth, was pleasant and green and well-watered. And instead of going to the portion that had been given to his own family, far to the south, he settled himself in that pleasant land in the center, and would not leave it, though it was not his by lot. And his father and his brothers warned him, and reminded him of the oath, and told him that a curse rested on those who took the land of another. But Canaan would not listen, and he stayed and made his home there. And so that good land came to be called by his name, the land of Canaan, though the book quietly reminds us it was not truly his, and one day it would return to those to whom it had first been given. The little Genesis lingers over this because it is, in a way, a seed of much that follows. The land in the middle of the earth, the holy center, the place of Zion, the good country by the sea. This is the land that Abraham will one day be promised, and that his children will one day come home to. And so the dividing of the earth is quietly laying down the first stone of a very long road, the road that leads across many hundreds of years, back to that same good land in the heart of the world. And so the sons of Noah kept the oath, most of them, and lived in peace within their portions, and their children grew, and built their first villages, and tilled their first fields, and made their homes in the lands that had come to them. Some went toward the great rivers, and some toward the sea, and some into the high and quiet mountains, and some into the wide and grassy plains. And each place in time grew dear to those who lived there, as the place where their children were born and their fathers were buried. This is how the world came to be full of homes, not all at once, but slowly, family by family, as the children of Noah spread out and settled and put down roots in the good ground that had been given them. But there is no hurry in any of this, and no alarm. It is told as a matter of long ago, the peaceful dividing of the world, the oaths sworn beneath the open sky, the peoples settling into their lands, each finding its place. Rivers found their names, coasts were traced and remembered. The great map of the world was slowly filled in, portion by portion, name by name, until the whole earth was accounted for, and every people had a home. There is a deep and simple comfort in it, the thought of the whole wide world being carefully divided, so that each has a place and none need go without. The thought of boundaries set not to divide people from one another in anger, but to give each a home to rest in. The thought of a father, old and wise, arranging the world for his children so that they might live in peace. Let that comfort settle over you now, the peaceful dividing of a whole earth, the map filling gently in the lamplight, each people finding its place and the world at rest. And as the peoples settle into their lands, the story turns toward a great tower and toward the scattering of the tongues of the world. Now the angel told Moses of the days after the dividing of the earth, and of some things that the older telling passes over quickly, but that the little Genesis pauses to explain. For there were in those days spirits that troubled the children of men, unclean spirits, the remnant of the old corruption from before the flood that went about leading people astray and drawing them into wrong and harmful ways. And over these spirits there was a chief, whose name in this book is Mastema. He was the leader of the spirits that worked mischief, and he asked that some of them be left free upon the earth, to test the children of men and to lead astray those who would be led. And it was allowed in a measure that a portion of them should remain, though the rest were bound. But the Lord did not leave the children of Noah without help against them. For when the spirits began to trouble the grandchildren of Noah, and to bring sickness and confusion among them, Noah prayed and asked that his descendants be protected. And the Lord heard the prayer of Noah and had mercy and did not leave his children defenseless. For most of the troubling spirits were bound and shut away, and only a small portion were permitted to remain, and against even those a help was given. For in answer to Noah's prayer, the angels came to him, and taught him the remedies against the harm the spirits did, the healing uses of the herbs and the roots and the growing things of the earth, so that sickness could be eased and the harm of the spirits turned aside. They showed him which leaf soothed a fever, and which root eased a pain, and which plant, gathered in its season, could mend what had been hurt. And Noah wrote all of it down in a book carefully, and gave that book to his eldest son, Shem, so that the knowledge of healing would be kept and passed along through the generations. It is a gentle thought that against the troubles of the world there was given knowledge and medicine, and the quiet wisdom of which plant heals which hurt, written in a book and handed down from father to son. The green and growing earth, which had been made on the third day, held within its leaves and roots the cures for many of the world's hurts, and the knowledge of them was a gift, taught by the angels and kept in a book, so that no one need suffer for want of a remedy that grew all along, just outside the door. And in those days the peoples of the earth were still gathered close together, before they had fully spread out into the lands that had been given to them. And they came, many of them, into one place, into a broad plain in the land toward the east, and they settled there together, and they were of one language and one speech. All the earth in that hour spoke with a single tongue, and understood one another perfectly, and there was no barrier of language between any of them. And being of one mind and one speech, they said to one another, "Let us build a city and a tower so tall that its top might reach up into the heavens." And they made bricks and baked them hard in the fire and gathered mortar and began to build. Higher and higher the tower rose, course upon course, a great work of many hands, all speaking the same words, all laboring together. It was a mighty thing to see, this tower climbing into the sky, built by a whole world that could understand itself. They labored at it for many long years, and it rose to a great and dizzying height, so that from its top a person might look out over a vast reach of the plain, and the fields and the rivers would seem small and far below. It was, in its way, a wonder, the greatest thing that human hands had yet made, raised by a whole world working as one. And there was nothing wrong in the building itself, nor in the working together, which was good. The trouble lay only in the pride that drove it, the wish to make themselves great, and to climb by their own strength into a place that was not theirs to take. And so the very thing they built to lift themselves up became, in the end, the place where their one speech was gently taken from them. But the reason they built it was not a humble one. They built it to make a name for themselves, and to lift themselves up, as though they might climb by their own hands into the place of heaven. And so the Lord looked upon the tower, and upon the pride that was raising it, and he resolved to turn it gently aside, not by any storm, and not by any flood, for he had promised there would be no more floods. He turned it aside in a quieter way. He confused their language. Where there had been one speech, suddenly there were many. The builders on the high scaffolds called out to one another as they always had, asking for more bricks, more mortar, calling for this tool or that, but now the words came out strange, and no one understood his neighbor. One man spoke, and another heard only sounds he did not know. The work faltered, and the calling turned to confusion, and the great tower stood half-built and silent. For the hands that raised it could no longer speak to one another. And here the little Genesis tells a thing the older telling leaves out entirely, a small, quiet detail that belongs to this book alone. For the tower did not simply stand there abandoned, a ruin left to weather down the slow centuries. When the speech of the builders had been confused, the Lord sent a great and gentle wind against the tower, and laid it down upon the earth. It came softly, the way an evening wind moves across a field of grain, and it settled the whole great work down into the plain, so that the proud height that had climbed toward heaven was laid low again, level with the ground from which it had risen. And the place where it had stood, between the two rivers in the land of Shinar, was given a name of its own in this telling. It was called Overthrow, in memory of the tower that a soft wind had laid down. It is a picture with no violence in it at all, only a wind and a settling, and a great thing gently returned to the earth. And so the peoples, no longer able to work together, and no longer of one tongue, drifted apart. Family by family and language by language, they left the plain where the tower had been laid low, and they went out at last into the wide earth, into the very lands that had been divided among them long before, into the portions that had fallen to Shem and to Ham and to Japheth. and each people carried its own tongue with it into its own country and settled there. And the place itself carried two names ever after: Babel, because there the speech of the whole world was mingled and confused, and Overthrow, because there the tower was laid gently down. And it unwinds without haste, the great gathering that had come together on the plain now coming gently apart again, spreading out in all directions like a crowd dispersing at the end of a long day, each family turning toward its own home. Those who spoke alike found one another and kept together and traveled on as one. And so the peoples of the earth took shape, each with its own tongue, its own songs, its own way of naming the world. And they went out to the north and the south, and the east and the west, and filled the lands that waited for them. And the earth grew full of the sound of many voices, where once there had been but one. The little Genesis tells this without any bitterness and without any dread. It is not told as a punishment so much as a gentle turning, a scattering that sent the peoples out to fill the earth as they were always meant to do, into the homes that had long been waiting for them. The tower that tried to reach heaven was laid softly down into the plain, and the peoples went out into their lands, and the earth was filled, portion by portion, tongue by tongue, just as it had been divided. And there is a quiet beauty even in the many languages of the world. For though the one speech was scattered, what came from it was the whole rich chorus of human tongues, every language that has ever sung a lullaby, or told a story by a fire, or spoken a word of love in the dark. The scattering did not silence the world. It only gave it many voices instead of one. So the peoples went out and settled and grew, and the earth filled with the sound of many tongues. And the book, as ever, keeps the count of it all, the generations turning over, the years gathering into weeks of years and into jubilees, the long, patient reckoning of time going steadily on beneath the coming and going of the peoples. For that is one of the deep, quiet themes of the whole book, that beneath all the movements of the nations, beneath the building and the scattering, beneath the rise and fall of tongues and towers, the count of the days goes on unbroken, faithful, ordered, never losing its place. The world may grow confused, and the peoples may drift apart, and languages may be scattered like leaves on the wind. But the years keep their number, and the seasons keep their turning, and heaven keeps the tally, and nothing is lost from the great and patient count. And in one of those lands, among the descendants of Shem, in the country from which so much of the rest of this story would come, the generations went quietly on from Shem to his sons, and down through the years, name by name, drawing slowly toward a certain household in the land of the Chaldees, where a boy would one day be born who would look up at the stars and begin to wonder. Let the tower be laid gently down now, level and quiet under the wide sky, and let the peoples go peacefully out into their lands. There is no harm in it, and nothing to fear. The earth is only being filled softly with homes and with voices. And as you sink a little softer into the quiet, the story draws near to that household in the land of the Chaldees, and to the boy who would question the idols. In the generations after the tower, the peoples settled into their lands, and the years turned on name after name, from Shem down through his sons, through Arpachshad and Shelah and Eber and Peleg and Ru and Serug and Nahor, until the line came to a man named Terah, who lived in the land of the Chaldees, in a place called Ur. And the little Genesis, as it always does, names the wives beside the fathers, so that the whole line runs on as a chain of households, each raising up the next in its season. Now in those days the world had grown forgetful. The peoples had made for themselves idols, images of wood and stone and molten metal, and had begun to bow down to them, and to serve them as though the things their own hands had made could hear them or help them. And Mastema and his spirits stirred them on in it, and led them astray, so that the worship of idols spread through the lands, and the memory of the one true God, the maker of heaven and earth, grew dim in the minds of men. Well, even in the house of Terah there were idols, and Terah served them, as his neighbors did. But to Terah was born a son named Abram, and Abram was not like the others. Even as a boy, Abram began to understand what those around him had forgotten. He began to see that the idols were only things, only shaped wood, and cold stone, and metal poured into molds, and that there was no life in them and no help. And he began to reason quietly that the world must have a maker, that the sun and the moon and the stars and the good green earth could not have made themselves, that behind all of it there must be one who was living and true, and who could actually hear a prayer. And so, while he was still young, Abram set his heart toward the God who made the heavens, and turned away in his mind from the idols of his father's house. The little Genesis tells a lovely little story of Abram's youth, in the days when he was still a young man in the land of the Chaldees. It was the season of sowing, when the people went out to scatter their seed upon the ground. But there was a trouble in that land. Great flocks of crows and ravens would come down out of the sky and eat up the seed before it could take root, so that much of it was lost, and the harvest suffered. And Mastema, it is said, sent these crows to devour the seed and to bring hardship upon the people. But Abram went out with the sowers, and when the crows came down in their great dark clouds to eat the seed, Abram rose up against them and commanded them, before they could settle, saying, "Go back to the place from which you came, and do not come down here." And at his word the crows turned in the air and flew away, and did not eat the seed. Again and again they came, and again Abram turned them back with a word, until at last they gave up and left the fields alone. And the seed was saved, and the sowers could sow in peace. And the people marveled at the young man who could turn the crows aside by speaking to them. And Abram did this many times, over many days of the sowing season. Day after day the great flocks came, and day after day the young man rose and turned them away, tireless, until the birds themselves seemed to learn that this field was watched, and this sower not to be troubled. There he was in the wide fields under the open sky, a young man walking the rows, lifting his voice against the wheeling dark birds, and the birds rising up and drifting off again and again, until the seed lay safe in the ground and the green shoots could come up in their season. It is a small and homely miracle, not a great sign in the heavens, but a young man protecting the seed of the poor so that they would have bread. And in it already, one can see the kind of man Abram would be, watchful and steadfast and kind, and unwilling to let harm come to those he could protect. And Abram, being clever and kind, did not stop there. He taught the sowers a better way to plant, to make a tool that would open the ground and drop the seed and cover it over in one motion, so that the seed was hidden in the earth before the birds could reach it. And the harvests grew rich again, and the young man's name became known as one who was wise and who cared for the good of the land. It is a small thing, perhaps, in so great a story, a better way of sowing seed, but the old book keeps it, and it tells us much about the man. For Abram's wisdom was not only turned toward the heavens and the stars, it was turned also toward the ground, toward the daily bread of ordinary people, toward the practical good of those around him. He was a man who wished to help, and who used what he understood to make life a little easier for his neighbors. And that same warmth of heart would go with him all the way to Canaan and beyond. Now Abram, seeing his father and his brothers still bowing down to idols, was grieved for them, and he tried gently to turn them from it. He spoke to his father Terah and said that the idols were nothing and could not save, and that he ought to serve the living God instead. And Terah in his heart knew that his son was right, but he was afraid of what the people would say, and so he did not turn away openly. And at last Abram did a bold thing. There was a house where the idols of the city were kept, and one night Abram set fire to it, so that the idols within would be burned. And in the confusion of that night, Abram's brother Haran ran into the burning house to try to rescue the images, and the fire overcame him, and Haran died there. It was a sorrow to the whole family, and yet it was also a kind of sign to them, that the idols could not even save the man who died trying to save them. And it was in this same season, the book says, that Abram was given something precious. He was taught the holy tongue, the language of creation, the speech in which the world was made, the language that had been lost and forgotten since the scattering at the tower. And with that language, he could read the old books of his fathers, the writings of Enoch and of Noah, and learn from them of the God who made the world, and of the ways of righteousness. And then at last the Lord himself spoke to Abram. He told him to leave his country and his kindred and his father's house, and to go to a land that would be shown to him, a land that would be given to him and to his children after him. And he promised to bless him, and to make of him a great people, and to make his name great, so that through him blessing would come to all the families of the earth. And Abram believed and obeyed. He gathered his household, and his wife, whose name was Sarai, and his nephew Lot, and all that they had. And he set out from the land of the Chaldees, from the only home he had ever known, and turned his face toward the west, toward the land that had been promised, the good land in the middle of the earth that had been set apart long ago. There is something deeply hopeful in the story of that young man, the boy who looked at the idols and saw that they were nothing, who looked at the stars and knew there must be a maker, who turned the crows aside with a word, and who at last set out, trusting, toward a land he had never seen. He carried nothing but a promise and a household and a great and quiet faith, and that was enough. So Abram went out in peace toward the land of promise, and the road opened before him under an open sky. He did not know all that lay ahead, and he did not need to. He only needed to go, one day at a time, trusting the one who had called him. Let that trust settle over you now, the trust of one who sets out toward a good land, carrying a promise, unafraid of the road. There is nothing here to fear. The way is open, and the promise is sure. And as Abram turns his face toward the west, the story goes with him, toward Canaan, and toward the covenant that would be made between the pieces. So Abram came into the land that had been promised, the land of Canaan, the good country in the middle of the earth, with its hills and its valleys and its long views toward the sea. And he traveled through it from place to place, pitching his tents and moving on, learning the shape of the land that would one day belong to his children. And wherever he stopped, he built an altar and called upon the name of the Lord, so that the whole land came to be marked quietly with the places where he had prayed. For a time there was a famine in the land, and Abram went down into Egypt where there was food. And in Egypt there was a danger, for Sarai his wife was very beautiful, and Abram feared that the powerful men of that country might harm him in order to take her. But the Lord watched over them and kept them, and brought them safely up out of Egypt again, richer than they had gone down, with flocks and herds and servants and silver and gold. And they returned to the land of Canaan, and to the place where Abram had built his altar before. Now Abram and his nephew Lot had both grown wealthy, with great flocks and herds, and the land could not easily hold them both together, and their herdsmen began to quarrel over the wells and the pastures. And Abram, who was a peaceable man, would not let there be strife between himself and his nephew. So he said to Lot, "Let there be no quarrel between us, for we are family. Look out over the land. If you go to the left, I will go to the right. And if you go to the right, I will go to the left." And Lot looked out and chose for himself the well-watered plain toward the east, toward the cities of the valley, and he went and settled there. And Abram remained in the land of Canaan, in the hill country, and the Lord blessed him there. And it was then that the Lord made with Abram the great covenant, the solemn promise that would bind them together forever. He brought Abram out under the night sky and told him to look up at the stars and to try to number them if he could. And Abram looked up at the countless stars scattered across the dark, more than any man could ever count. And the Lord said to him, "So shall your children be, as many as the stars of heaven, as many as the sand upon the shore." And Abram believed the Lord, and it was counted to him as righteousness. There stood that old man, alone in the cool of the night, his face turned up to a sky ablaze with stars, the great river of them spilling across the dark from one edge of the world to the other, more than the eye could hold, more than the mind could count. And into that vast and silent glory came the promise, "All of these and more shall be your children." It was an impossible thing to say to a man who had no children at all and who was already old. and yet Abram believed it. He did not argue, and he did not doubt. He looked at the stars, and he took the promise into his heart, and he trusted. And that trust was counted to him as righteousness, as though believing a good and faithful God were itself the truest and finest thing a person could do. And to seal the promise, there was a solemn and ancient sign. Abram was told to take certain animals and to divide them and to lay the pieces out in 2 rows with a path between them. And as the sun went down and a deep sleep and a great darkness fell upon Abram, there passed between the divided pieces a sign of the presence of the Lord, like a flame moving through the dark. It was the old way of sealing a covenant, the 2 parties passing together between the pieces, as if to say, may this bond hold as surely as these pieces lie here. And so the Lord bound himself to Abram and promised again the land, from the river of Egypt to the great river, the river Euphrates, for Abram and for his children after him. It is remembered as the covenant between the pieces, a promise made in the deep quiet of the night, sealed with a moving flame, unbreakable. As the years went on, and Sarai had borne Abram no children, and she grew weary of waiting. And so, as was the custom of that time, she gave to Abram her handmaid, a woman named Hagar, and Hagar bore him a son, and he was named Ishmael. And Abram loved the boy, but the promise of the covenant was not yet fulfilled, for the child of the promise was still to come. Then the Lord appeared to Abram again, and made the covenant deeper still, and gave him a new name. No longer would he be called Abram, but Abraham, for he was to be the father of many nations. And Sarai was given a new name too, Sarah. And the Lord gave to Abraham a sign to be kept in his own body, and in the bodies of all his household, and all his children after him, the sign of circumcision, a mark of the covenant carried in the flesh, so that the bond between God and this people would never be forgotten, but be kept from generation to generation. And the little Genesis says that this ordinance was written in the tablets of heaven, an everlasting sign, and that the very highest angels were made circumcised as well, so that this people, keeping the sign, would be joined to the holy ones of heaven. And the Lord promised that Sarah herself, though she was old and long past the years of bearing children, would yet have a son, the true child of the promise. And when Abraham heard it, and when Sarah heard it, they could scarcely believe it, for they were so old. But the Lord said, "Is anything too hard for the Lord?" At the appointed time, Sarah would have a son. And then one bright day, as Abraham sat at the door of his tent in the heat of the afternoon, 3 visitors came to him, messengers of heaven, in the form of travelers. And Abraham ran to meet them, though he was old, and welcomed them warmly, and bowed to them, and begged them to stay and rest. And he hurried to make them comfortable, bringing water to wash their feet, and setting them beneath the cool shade of a great tree, and preparing for them a fine meal, with bread freshly baked, and the best of what his household had. It is a lovely picture of the old man's kindness, how gladly he welcomed strangers, how eager he was to give them rest and refreshment, not knowing at first that they were messengers from heaven. And they ate and were at ease, and then they told him again that Sarah would have a son within the year. And Sarah, listening from inside the tent, laughed softly to herself at the thought of it, for she was so very old. But the promise held. In the appointed season, exactly as it had been said, Sarah bore a son to Abraham in his old age, and they named him Isaac, a name that means laughter for the joy of it and for the wonder of it, and for the quiet laugh that had once slipped from an old woman who could hardly believe such gladness could still come to her. And the child of the promise was born at last, and there was rejoicing in the household of Abraham, and the long waiting was over. And the little Genesis says that Abraham kept a feast at the time of Isaac's birth, and that he was among the first to keep the Feast of Tabernacles, dwelling in booths of green branches, and rejoicing before the Lord with a glad and grateful heart. He made booths of leafy boughs, and took in his hands the fruit and the branches of goodly trees, and went about them rejoicing, and offered his thanksgiving to the Lord who had kept his promise. So joy was written into the calendar, to and given its season, a feast of gladness, kept year after year, in remembrance of the child who was given when all hope of children seemed past. And it is a lovely thing that such gladness should be tied to a feast, so that the joy of it would come round again every year, faithful as the seasons, and never be forgotten. For the little Genesis loves to give even joy a place in the ordering of the year, so that gladness, too, has its appointed and returning season. There is a deep and tender comfort in that thought, that a promise long delayed can still be kept, that laughter can come to those who had almost stopped waiting for it, that even in great old age a new joy can be born. Nothing here is too late, and nothing is lost. Let that gladness rest over you now, the old promise kept, the child of laughter born, the feast of green branches, the household at peace. And as Isaac grows in the house of his father, the story turns toward a mountain and toward a ram caught in a thicket. Isaac grew in the house of his father into a fine young man, the child of the promise, the joy of Abraham's old age, dearer to him than anything else on the earth. And it is at this point in the story that the little Genesis tells one of its most tender episodes, and tells it in a way that eases some of the older telling's sharpness. For there came a day when Abraham was tested, and the book is careful to say who it was that first raised the test. It was Mastema, the chief of the accusing spirits, who came before the Lord and said, in effect, "Behold, Abraham loves his son Isaac above all things more, perhaps, than he loves you. Try him and see." It is a small but meaningful detail kept in this book, that the hard testing did not begin in the heart of God, but in the words of the accuser, the same voice that is always ready to doubt the faithfulness of the faithful. And so Abraham was told to take his son, his only son, whom he loved, and to go to a certain mountain, and there to offer him up. It was a terrible thing to ask, and the telling does not pretend otherwise. But Abraham, who had trusted the Lord in all things, and who had learned across a long life that the Lord was faithful, did not turn aside. He rose early in the morning, and saddled his donkey, and took Isaac and 2 young men and wood for the offering, and set out toward the mountain. They traveled for 3 days, and those 3 days were quiet ones, the slow walking, the road unwinding, the old father and the young son going up together into the hills. 3 days is a long time to walk with a heavy heart, and what passed between father and son on that road is left unspoken. The silence is allowed to be. Perhaps they spoke of small things as travelers do. Perhaps they walked much of the way without speaking at all, side by side. The dust rising softly under their feet, the hills growing slowly nearer. Whatever was in Abraham's heart, he kept walking, one step and then the next, trusting the God who had never yet failed him. And when they came at last within sight of the mountain, Abraham left the young men behind, and he and Isaac went on alone, the boy carrying the wood and the father carrying the fire. And as they climbed, Isaac asked his father where the lamb for the offering was, and Abraham answered gently that God himself would provide it. And so they went on, the two of them together, up the quiet slope, and those words turned out to be truer than even Abraham knew. God would provide. He always meant to provide. The whole hard climb was moving, though Abraham could not yet see it, toward a ram caught in a thicket, and a son restored, and a promise made new. And when they came to the place, Abraham built an altar and laid the wood upon it. And there is a great and trembling stillness in the story here, which is not rushed. Abraham prepared everything and bound his son and lifted his hand, and in that moment, when his faith had been shown to be complete, when it was proved that he held nothing back, not even the child he loved most, a voice from heaven called out to him and stopped him. Abraham, Abraham, do not lay a hand on the boy. Now it is known that you fear God, for you have not withheld your son, your only son, from me. And Abraham looked up, and there, caught by its horns in a thicket nearby, was a ram provided, just as he had said God would provide. And he took the ram and offered it upon the altar in place of his son. And Isaac was unbound and lived, and came down the mountain again beside his father, safe. And the little Genesis notes that Mastema, the accuser, was put to shame, for Abraham had proven faithful, and the accusation had failed. And the Lord blessed Abraham there upon the mountain, and renewed all his promises, that his children would be as many as the stars, and as the sand of the sea, and that through them all the nations of the earth would be blessed, because he had obeyed and had held nothing back. And the little Genesis draws from this a gentle and lasting comfort, that the God who is served is not a God who delights in loss, but one who provides. The whole terrible testing had been, in the end, a thing that ended in a ram and not a son, in life and not in death, in a promise renewed and not a hope destroyed. What the accuser had meant for grief, the Lord turned into a showing of his own faithfulness. For the very moment Abraham's trust was proven complete. The knife was stayed, and the ram was found, and the boy went home alive. And so this hard story, which might have ended in the darkest of sorrows, is remembered instead as one of deliverance. The mountain where God provided, and where a father and a son walked back down together into the light of an ordinary evening. So they came down the mountain together, father and son, and went home in peace. And that is where the hard testing comes to rest, not in loss, but in a son restored, a ram provided, a promise renewed, and an old man walking home beside the boy he loved, both of them safe under the evening sky. The years went on, and there was much life still to be lived. Sarah, who had waited so long for her son and had known the joy of him at last, grew very old, and in her time she died at the age of 127 years. And Abraham mourned for her and buried her with honor in a cave he bought for that purpose, in the land that had been promised, a quiet resting place in the country that would one day belong to their children. And in time, Abraham took a wife for his son Isaac, a good young woman named Rebekah, brought from among his own kindred, so that the line of the promise would continue in faithfulness. And Abraham himself grew very old, full of years, and full of days, and full of a long life well lived. And as his end drew near, he gathered his family around him, as the fathers in this book always do, to bless them and to give them his last words. And the little Genesis lingers over one blessing above the others, the blessing that Abraham gave to his grandson Jacob, the young son of Isaac and Rebekah. For Abraham loved Jacob especially, and saw in him the one through whom the promise would go on. The book tells that in his last years, Abraham kept the boy Jacob close to him, and delighted in him, and taught him the things he had learned across his long life, of the one God who made the heavens, of the ways of righteousness, of the covenant and its keeping. And there is a great sweetness in that picture. The very old man and the young boy sitting together in the quiet of the evening, the grandfather passing on to the grandson all that he had gathered in a lifetime of faith, so that nothing would be lost when he was gone. And when the time came, Abraham laid his hands upon the boy and blessed him with a great and tender blessing, that God would keep him and multiply him and make his children a holy people and gather them and set his love upon them forever. And Abraham gave to all his children his last instructions, to keep the way of the Lord, to do what was right and just, to hold to the covenant, to turn away from idols, and to love one another. And then, having blessed them, and having laid the hands of blessing upon the young Jacob, Abraham lay down, and his long life came gently to its end. And his sons buried him beside Sarah, in the cave in the land of promise, and he was gathered to his people in peace, at a good old age. There is a deep rest in the passing of Abraham, a man who had left everything on a promise, who had waited through long years for a child, who had climbed a mountain and come down again with his son beside him, and who at the end was surrounded by his family, blessing the generations to come, and laid to rest in the very land he had been promised. He lacked nothing. His life was full, and it was finished well. Let that fullness rest over you now, a long life completed, a blessing given, an old man laid down in peace in the land of promise. And as the blessing of Abraham settles upon the young Jacob, the story turns toward Jacob himself, and toward the blessing he would one day receive from his father. Isaac and Rebekah had 2 sons, born to them as twins, and they were as different from one another as 2 brothers could be. The elder was named Esau, a strong and ruddy man, a hunter who loved the open field and the chase. And the younger was named Jacob, a quieter man, a keeper of tents and of flocks, thoughtful and mild. And though Esau came first by only a little, it was Jacob who carried the blessing that Abraham had spoken over him. And it was Jacob through whom the promise would go on. Now the little Genesis, following the older telling, remembers how the birthright passed from the elder to the younger. There came a day when Esau returned from the field very hungry and found Jacob cooking a pottage of lentils. And Esau, faint with hunger, asked for some of it. And Jacob said, "Sell me first your birthright, the right of the firstborn, the double portion and the leadership of the family." And Esau, who cared little for such things in that moment, and thought only of his hunger, said, "What good is a birthright to me if I am starving?" And so he swore it away, and sold his birthright to his brother for a bowl of stew. It is remembered not with scorn, but as a quiet lesson, that Esau valued lightly the very thing that ought to have been most precious to him, and traded it away for a passing comfort. And the years went on, and Isaac grew old, and his eyes grew dim, so that he could no longer see. And Rebekah, remembering the blessing of Abraham, and knowing in her heart that the promise was meant for Jacob, resolved to see that Jacob received his father's blessing. For Isaac, in his old age, had meant to bless Esau, his elder son, the hunter, whose game he loved to eat. So when Isaac sent Esau out to hunt, that he might prepare a meal and give his blessing, Rebekah quietly prepared a meal herself, and dressed Jacob in Esau's garments, and brought him into his father while Esau was still away. And Isaac, who could not see, felt the garments and smelled the field upon them, and believed that it was Esau who knelt before him. And he laid his hands upon Jacob, and blessed him with the great blessing, that God would give him the dew of heaven and the richness of the earth, that peoples would serve him, and that he would be a lord over his brothers, and that those who blessed him would be blessed. And so the blessing of the firstborn came to rest upon Jacob, the younger son. The book does not hide that this was done by a mother's quiet design through a gentle deception, but it holds all the same that the blessing came to the one it was always meant for, to Jacob, whom Abraham himself had blessed, through whom the promise had always been meant to pass. Rebekah had not so much stolen the blessing as guided it home. For Rebekah had understood something from the very beginning. Even before her sons were born, it had been made known to her that the elder would serve the younger, that of the two children within her, it was the younger, Jacob, who would carry the covenant forward. And so all through their growing up, she had watched over Jacob and cherished the promise and waited. And when at last the moment came, and Isaac in his blindness meant to give the blessing to Esau, Rebekah acted to see that it went where it had always been meant to go. The old book, which loves Jacob, does not linger over the strangeness of the means. It sees only that the blessing found its true home, and that the promise of Abraham passed safely into the hands of the son who would keep it. But when Esau returned and learned that the blessing had already been given, he was filled with grief and anger, and he wept, and his heart turned bitter toward his brother. And Rebekah, seeing that Esau's anger might grow dangerous, counseled Jacob to go away for a time, to travel to the land of her own kindred, far to the east where her brother lived, and to stay there until Esau's anger cooled. And she had another reason as well. Dear to her heart, she did not wish Jacob to marry a woman of Canaan, as Esau had done, but to take a wife from among their own faithful people. And Isaac agreed and blessed Jacob again, openly this time, sending him on his way with the full blessing of Abraham upon him, that God would multiply him and give him and his children the land of promise. So Jacob set out alone on the long road toward the east, toward the land of his mother's kindred. It was a hard thing, perhaps, to leave home in this way, to go out from the tents of his father and mother, from the only country he had known, into a far land where he had never been, carrying only the blessing and a mother's hopeful counsel. He went on foot with little, a single traveler upon a long road, the familiar hills falling away behind him and the strange country opening ahead. But he was not truly alone, though he did not yet know it. For the God of Abraham and of Isaac went with him upon that road, and had already prepared, at a certain place along the way, a comfort he would never forget. And it was on that road that he had the dream for which he is most remembered. For one night as he traveled, the sun went down, and Jacob stopped in a certain place to rest. And he took one of the stones of that place and put it under his head for a pillow, and lay down to sleep beneath the open sky. And as he slept, he dreamed. He saw a ladder or a great stairway set up on the earth, with its top reaching into heaven, and upon it the angels of God were going up and coming down, ascending and descending between earth and heaven, in a quiet and shining procession. And above it stood the Lord, who spoke to Jacob, and renewed to him all the promises of Abraham, that the land on which he lay would be given to him and to his children, that his descendants would be many, spreading out to the west and the east, the north and the south, that through him all the families of the earth would be blessed, and most tenderly of all, that the Lord himself would be with him, and would keep him wherever he went, and would bring him home again, and would never leave him. And Jacob woke from his sleep, filled with awe, and said, "Surely the Lord is in this place, and I did not know it. This is none other than the house of God, and this is the gate of heaven." There is a great wonder in that waking, a lone and weary traveler, who had lain down on the bare ground with only a stone beneath his head, believing himself alone in an empty land, and who woke to find that he had slept at the very gate of heaven, and that all through the night the angels had been going up and coming down above him, and the Lord himself had stood over him and spoken words of blessing. He had felt himself abandoned, and he had been watched over all the while. He had thought himself alone, and he had been surrounded by shining ones. The place had seemed empty and comfortless, and it was in truth the house of God. And in the morning he took the stone that had been his pillow, and set it up as a pillar, and poured oil upon it, and called that place Bethel, which means the house of God. And he made a vow that if the Lord would keep him, and bring him home in peace, then the Lord would be his God, and he would give back to him a tenth of all that he was given. And then Jacob went on his way, comforted and unafraid, for he carried now not only the blessing of his father, but the promise of God spoken over him under the open sky, that he would be kept and watched over and brought safely home again. Whatever waited for him in the far country, he did not go alone. There is a great and quiet comfort in that promise, spoken to a lone traveler sleeping on a stone beneath the stars. I will be with you and will keep you wherever you go and will bring you home again. It is, perhaps, the gentlest promise in the whole book, and it is given not in a temple or on a mountain, but on the bare ground to a tired man in the middle of a long journey with only a stone for a pillow. Wherever you go, I will keep you, and I will bring you home. Let that promise rest over you now, as it rested over Jacob, that you are kept and watched over, and that the road, however long, leads home. And as Jacob goes on toward the east, the story goes with him, toward the wells and the wives and the long way home. Jacob came at last to the land of the east, to the country of his mother's kindred, and there he found the household of his uncle Laban. And it was beside a well in the open field that he first met Rachel, the daughter of Laban, who came there to water her father's sheep. And Jacob helped her to roll away the great stone from the mouth of the well, and to water the flock, and he knew her at once as his own kinswoman. And he was welcomed into Laban's house as family. And he stayed there and worked, and made his home in that far country for a long season of years. Now Laban had 2 daughters. The elder was named Leah, and the younger was named Rachel, and Jacob loved Rachel. And he agreed to work for Laban 7 years in exchange for Rachel's hand, and those 7 years seemed to him but a few days, so great was his love. But when the time came, Laban gave him the elder daughter, Leah, instead, according to the custom that the elder should marry first. And Jacob, though grieved by the deception, loved Rachel still, and worked yet another 7 years, and in time married Rachel as well. And so he had 2 wives, the sisters Leah and Rachel, and in time their 2 handmaids also, Zilpah and Bilhah, as was the custom of that age. And to Jacob in the years that followed were born many children, the sons who would become the fathers of a whole people. The little Genesis names them, as it loves to do, one by one with their mothers and the years of their birth, so that not one of them goes unremembered. Leah bore Reuben first, and then Simon and Levi and Judah. And in time came Dan and Naphtali and Gad and Asher and Issachar and Zebulun and a daughter named Dinah. And at last Rachel, who had long waited and long sorrowed for want of a child, bore a son and named him Joseph, the beloved son, born late and dearly loved. And later still, another son would come to her. So the household of Jacob grew large, full of children and of flocks in the land of the east. There is a warm and homely feeling in this part of the story, the tents of Jacob filling up, year by year, with children, the sound of little ones underfoot, the flocks multiplying in the fields, the long table growing crowded. Whatever hardships Jacob suffered under Laban, and there were many, his house was full of life, and his children were many, and the blessing spoken over him was quietly coming true before his eyes. From one lone traveler with a stone for a pillow, the whole household had grown sons and a daughter, wives and servants, flocks and herds, the beginning of a people as numerous as the stars. And Jacob prospered greatly under the blessing of God, though Laban dealt with him unfairly again and again, changing his wages and holding him back. But the more Laban tried to keep him down, the more Jacob's flocks increased, until he had become a man of great wealth, with sheep and camels and servants and much livestock. And at last the Lord told Jacob that it was time to go home, back to the land of his fathers, back to Canaan, back to the land of promise. For the Lord remembered the vow that Jacob had made at Bethel, and he would keep his word to bring him home again. So Jacob gathered his wives and his children and all his flocks and his possessions, and set out on the long road back toward the west, toward the land he had left so many years before. And though there were troubles along the way, for Laban pursued him, and there was fear of meeting Esau again, the Lord watched over him as he had promised. Laban and Jacob parted at last in peace, making a covenant between them, and setting up a heap of stones as a witness that neither would harm the other. And when Jacob came near to his brother Esau, whom he had feared, Esau ran to meet him, and embraced him, and wept. And the two brothers were reconciled, and there was peace between them at last. So the fear that had hung over the long journey was lifted, and the brothers who had parted in anger met again in kindness. Now the little Genesis tells of a sorrow that came upon the household as they journeyed, and of how one of Jacob's sons was set apart in the midst of it. For Dinah, the daughter of Jacob, was wronged by a man of the land, a prince of the city of Shechem, who took her against the honor of the family. And two of her brothers, Simon and Levi, rose up in anger to defend their sister and the honor of their house. The telling does not linger in the violence of it, and neither shall we. It is enough to say that they answered the wrong that had been done, and defended their sister, though at a great and grievous cost. The little Genesis holds the honor of Dinah's family very dear, and grieves the wrong that was done to her, and does not blame her in any way. She was wronged, and her brothers rose to defend her. And the sorrow of it passes without dwelling on the blood, turning instead toward what was redeemed out of the sorrow. For out of that hard episode, the little Genesis draws something that matters to the whole rest of the story. For Levi, in his zeal to defend what was holy and right, was chosen, set apart by God for a sacred task. And the book tells that this choosing was confirmed to Jacob in a dream, and that Levi was clothed, as it were, in the garments of the priesthood, and lifted up to stand before God on behalf of the people. So a family that had known sorrow was given a great and holy calling, and the line of Levi became, from that day, the keepers of the sanctuary and the ministers of the holy things, a bright thread of blessing drawn out of a dark hour. It was appointed that Levi and his children after him should be the priests of the people, those who would keep the holy things and offer the sacrifices, and stand before God on behalf of all the others, and teach the law and bless the people. And this is told with great honor and gladness, that from this family would come the keepers of the sanctuary, the singers of the holy songs, the guardians of the covenant. The priesthood in the little Genesis is a bright and precious thread, and here is where it is first woven in. And along the way, the Lord blessed and guarded Jacob's household, and taught his sons the ways they should walk, and kept the covenant alive among them. And Jacob built altars in the places where he stopped, and called upon the name of the Lord, and kept the feasts in their seasons, teaching his children to do the same, so that the faith of Abraham and of Isaac would not be lost in the new generation, but carried on. For that was ever the great work of the fathers in this book, not only to father children, but to hand on the faith to them, whole and living, so that the light passed from one generation to the next without ever going out. And Jacob came at last to Bethel, to the very place where, long ago, as a lone traveler, he had dreamed of the ladder reaching into heaven and had been promised that he would be brought home again. And now the promise was fulfilled. He had gone out alone with only a stone for a pillow, and he had come back with a great household, with 12 sons, with flocks beyond counting, safe and whole in the land of promise. And there at Bethel he built an altar and worshipped, and gave to God the tithes he had vowed, 1/10 of all he had, and renewed his covenant with the Lord who had kept every promise. And God appeared to him again and blessed him, and gave him a new name, Israel, the name by which his whole people would ever after be known. There is a deep and satisfying peace in the homecoming of Jacob. The wanderer returned, the vow fulfilled, the frightened brothers reconciled, the great household gathered safe in the land of promise, the altar built at the very place where the promise was first given. He had gone out with nothing, and had been kept every step of the way, and had been brought home again, exactly as it had been promised beneath the stars. Not one word had failed. Let that homecoming settle over you now. The long road ended, the promise kept, the household safe, the altar raised at Bethel in the quiet of the evening. And as Jacob rests at last in the land of his fathers, the story turns toward his beloved son Joseph, and toward the long road that would lead, in the end, back to a mountain in the wilderness. Of all the sons of Jacob, the one he loved most was Joseph, the firstborn of Rachel, a bright and gentle young man in whom his father took great delight. And because Jacob loved him so and showed it openly, Joseph's older brothers grew jealous of him, and their jealousy hardened into resentment. And when Joseph dreamed dreams in which the sun and the moon and the stars and the sheaves of the field all bowed down to him, and told those dreams to his brothers, their resentment grew stronger still. And so there came a day when Joseph had been sent out to find his brothers where they were keeping the flocks far from home, that they seized him, and rather than harm him themselves, sold him to a company of merchants who were traveling down to Egypt. And the merchants carried the young man away, down into that distant land, and sold him there as a servant. And the brothers took Joseph's coat, and dipped it in blood, and brought it to their father, and let him believe that a wild beast had killed his beloved son. And Jacob mourned for Joseph, and would not be comforted, believing him dead. The little Genesis tells this grief plainly, and it is a real grief, but we know, as the telling knows, that Joseph was not dead, and that this sorrow was not the end of the story. For in Egypt, Joseph was bought into the house of a great official, a man named Potiphar, and there Joseph served faithfully, and the Lord was with him, so that everything he did prospered. And in time his master saw it, and set Joseph over his whole household, and trusted him with everything. But Potiphar's wife looked upon the young man with desire, and tried to draw him into wrong, and Joseph refused her again and again. For he would not sin against his master or against God. And in her anger at being refused, she accused him falsely. And Joseph was cast into prison, though he had done no wrong. Yet even in the prison the Lord was with him, and Joseph found favor there and was set over the other prisoners. And it happened that 2 of the king's servants were imprisoned there for a time, and each of them dreamed a troubling dream, and Joseph, to whom God had given the understanding of dreams, told them what their dreams meant. And it came to pass just as he said. And so, when at last the king of Egypt himself dreamed dreams that none of his wise men could explain, dreams of 7 fat cattle and 7 lame, of 7 full ears of grain and 7 withered, Joseph was remembered and brought up out of the prison and stood before the king. And Joseph told the king that his dreams were a warning from God, that 7 years of great plenty were coming upon the land, and then 7 years of famine, and that grain should be gathered and stored during the years of plenty, so that the people would not starve when the famine came. And the king saw the wisdom of it, and saw that the Spirit of God was in Joseph, and he did a wonderful thing. He took the young man who had been a servant and a prisoner, and set him over the whole land of Egypt, second only to the king himself. He clothed him in fine linen, and put a ring upon his hand, and a chain of gold about his neck, and gave him to ride in a chariot of honor, so that the one who had come into Egypt as a slave, and had lain forgotten in a prison, now rode through the land as its governor. It is one of the great turnings in all the old stories, the lowest lifted to the highest, the forgotten one remembered, the wronged one raised up, not for his own sake alone, but so that through him a whole world might be fed. And Joseph gathered the grain through the 7 good years, storing it up in great abundance, filling the storehouses of every city until the grain was beyond counting, like the sand of the sea. And when the 7 years of famine came, and the land grew hungry, and the fields gave nothing, Egypt alone had bread, because of the wisdom that God had given to Joseph. And people came from many lands to buy grain, for the famine was heavy over all the earth. And the famine spread far beyond Egypt, into the land of Canaan, where Jacob and his sons still lived. And when Jacob heard that there was grain in Egypt, he sent his sons down to buy food. And so the brothers who had sold Joseph away came at last, without knowing it, and bowed down before him, the very governor of Egypt, who held their lives in his hand, was the brother they had wronged so long ago. And Joseph knew them, though they did not know him. But there was no cruelty in Joseph. He tested them for a time to see whether their hearts had changed, and he wept in secret for the love of them, turning aside where they could not see him, so that they would not know how his heart was moved. And at last he could hold back no longer, and he sent everyone else away and stood before his brothers alone, and made himself known to them, saying, I am Joseph, your brother, whom you sold into Egypt. and the brothers were afraid, for they remembered what they had done, and now the one they had wronged held all power over them. But Joseph comforted them and told them not to grieve nor to be angry with themselves, for God had turned even their wrong to good, sending him ahead of them into Egypt, so that he might save many lives and keep their whole family alive through the famine. "Come near to me," he said, and they came near. And he embraced them and wept upon them and kissed them, one after another, the brothers who had once meant him harm. It is one of the most healing moments in all the old stories. The brother who was wronged, holding no bitterness, weeping over the very ones who had harmed him and forgiving them freely and gathering them into his arms. All the long years of separation, all the sorrow of the selling and the grief of the father, all of it was folded up and set aside in that one embrace. What had been broken was made whole again. And Joseph sent for his father and for all his family, and brought them down to live in Egypt, in a good and fertile part of the land, where there was food and safety through the years of famine. And Jacob, the old man who had believed his beloved son long dead, came down into Egypt and saw Joseph's face again, and embraced him and wept, and said that now he could die in peace, for he had seen his son alive. And the whole family of Israel was gathered together in Egypt, Jacob and his 12 sons, and all their children, safe and fed, and reunited in the days of the great famine. And Jacob lived out his last years in Egypt, in peace, surrounded by his children and his grandchildren, and blessed them all before he died. He gathered his sons about him at the last, as the fathers in this book always do, and blessed each of them, and spoke to them of what would come, and charged them to keep the covenant and to walk in the ways of Abraham and Isaac. And then, full of years and content, having seen his beloved Joseph again and lived to hold his grandchildren, the old man laid down and was gathered to his people. And his sons carried him up, as he had asked, back to the land of promise, and buried him there beside his fathers, in the cave that Abraham had bought so long ago. And in time Joseph too grew old, and died, having seen his children's children, having lived a long and faithful life, and having kept his family alive through the famine. And the people of Israel remained in Egypt, and grew, and multiplied, and became a great people, as had been promised to Abraham so long ago, as many as the stars. And here at the last, the little Genesis brings us back to where it began. For the years turned on, and long after Joseph and his brothers had died, the people of Israel were still in Egypt, grown very numerous, and a new king arose who did not remember Joseph, nor all that he had done, and who began to press hard upon the people, and to make them serve in hard labor. And so the long night of Egypt began, out of which, in time, a deliverer would come. And that deliverer was Moses. He was born in those hard years, to a family of the children of Israel, in a time when the king had grown afraid of how many they were, and had commanded that their little sons be taken from them. But his mother hid him for 3 months, and when she could hide him no longer, she made a small basket of reeds and sealed it, and laid him gently among the rushes at the edge of the river, and set his sister to watch from a little way off. And there the daughter of the king came down to bathe, and found the basket, and looked upon the child, and had pity on him. And she took him up out of the water, and raised him as her own son in the house of the king. So the one who would lead the people out was drawn up out of the very river, and grew up in the courts of the land that held his people captive, kept safe, without knowing it, for the work that was waiting for him. And the little Genesis, telling of the years that followed, keeps its own quiet mark upon them. For when the time came at last for the people to be set free, and the Lord sent Moses back to stand before the king and ask that the people be let go, there was one who stood against him, Mastema, the chief of the accusing spirits, the same voice that had risen against Abraham long before. It was Mastema who hardened the matter and pressed the king to refuse, and set himself against the freeing of the people at every turn. And so the older telling and this one both speak of the signs and wonders that came upon the land of Egypt then, one after another, until the king's own heart was worn down and he let the people go. But this book tells the deeper thing behind them, that it was the accuser who fought against their leaving, and that he was met and answered, and in the end bound and put to silence, so that he could not stand in the way of the people's freedom. The great deliverance was not only a passing out of a land, it was the accuser overcome, the voice of doubt stilled, and the way home opened at last. And on the last night in Egypt, before ever they went out, there came the first Passover. The little Genesis lingers over it, for it is one of the great feasts fixed in the count of the year. On that night, the people of Israel gathered each family into its own house, and kept a lamb, and marked their doorways, and ate together in readiness, dressed for the road, with the meal that is eaten standing, bread without leaven, and the lamb roasted whole, and none of it left until morning. And through that night, while they kept the feast within their doors, they were passed over and kept safe. And the power that had held them so long was broken. And in the morning they went out, a great company, family by family, out of the land of their long captivity, and toward the land that had been promised to Abraham so many years before. And the book sets that night forever in its place in the calendar, so that in every year that followed the people would keep it again on the same night. Is in memory a feast of freedom, fixed like a lamp in the turning of the year, so that the deliverance would never be forgotten, and the count of it would never be lost. And then came the sea, for the king, when the people had gone, repented of letting them go, and gathered his chariots and pursued them, and overtook them at the edge of a great water, so that the people were caught between the sea before them and the army behind. And it was Mastema, this book says, who drove that last pursuit, hurrying the Egyptians on to take the people again. But the Lord opened a way for Israel through the very midst of the sea, and the waters stood apart. And the people passed through on dry ground, between the walls of the water, and came up safe upon the far shore. And the pursuing army, following after into the sea, was held there, and the waters came together again over them, and the danger was ended. And the people stood safe upon the farther side, delivered, with the water between them and all that had held them. And so the accuser was overthrown, and Israel was free, and there was singing on the shore of the sea in the morning. And when all of this was done, the people brought out, and the sea crossed, and the long captivity ended. They came at last to the mountain in the wilderness. And there, upon Mount Sinai, the Lord gave to Moses not only the law, but the keeping of the times, the Sabbaths and the years, and the great turning of the Jubilees. For the book ends where its whole heart has always been in the counting of the days, and the resting of the seventh, and the 7 weeks of years that gather into the 50th. The year of Jubilee, when debts are loosed, and the land itself is given rest, and every wanderer may return to his own home. This the angel of the presence charged Moses to keep, and to give to the people, and to write down for every generation, to number the years faithfully, and to keep the Sabbath holy, and to let the Jubilee come in its season, so that the count begun on the first evening of creation should go on unbroken to the end of the world, and nothing should ever be lost from it. And so the whole story came round to where it had begun, the same Moses who now sat upon the mountain in the cloud, listening to the angel of the presence tell the whole story of the world from its very beginning. For all of this, the making of the world, the garden, the flood, the fathers, the family carried down into Egypt, and the people led out again, all of it had been told to Moses so that he might understand where his people had come from and where they were being led. The story had gone out from the mountain of creation, across all the long years, and had come at last back to a mountain again, to Sinai, where a tired man wrote it all down by the light within the cloud, keeping it for every generation that would come after. And so the great circle was closed. The angel of the presence finished the telling, and the words were written, and the book was complete, the history of the days and the years and the jubilees of the world, from the first evening of creation to the mountain in the wilderness. And a deep peace lay over the whole of it, from beginning to end. Let that peace settle fully over you now, the whole long story told, from the making of the light to the family gathered safe, and back again to the quiet mountain where it was written down and kept, every promise kept, every wanderer brought home, nothing lost from the count of the years. And so we leave them there, the family of Israel gathered safe in a far land, the story written down and kept upon the mountain, the long count of the years complete, and the whole world from its first evening to this one held in a great and quiet peace. There is nothing left to carry and nothing left to fear. The book is finished and it ends as it began in stillness. Let the mountain grow soft and distant now. Let the words settle. Let the last of the day go, and let the quiet come all the way in. The scroll closes for tonight. This is Sleepy Scrolls. Thank you for resting here. May you be kept in peace until morning. May your night be quiet and your rest be deep. Sleep well.